Welcome to the Redeeming Stories podcast, a space where we honor the courage it takes to heal, to reclaim our identity, and to rewrite the stories that once held us back. I'm your host, Julie M. Lane from at Redeem Thyself and at Seven Petals. And today I'm joined by someone whose work deeply reflects the heart of this podcast, Dr. Watkins, a recent PsyD graduate from Widener University, now serving as a supervised doctoral trainee in private practice. Beyond the therapy room, Dr. Watkins uses her platform at dr.dwatkins to share insight, resources, and support specifically the Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, spaces that have historically faced barriers to mental health access, representation, and trauma-informed care. Her mission is rooted in healing, empowerment, and cultural humility, ensuring that those who have often been underserved still have pathways to reflection, connection, and emotional safety. In today's conversation, we'll talk about the experiences that inspired her to enter healthcare, the importance of culturally attuned therapy, the realities of trauma in marginalized communities, and why accessible mental health education matters now more than ever. This is the Redeeming Stories podcast, and today we're exploring what it means to heal with intention, honor identity, and create mental health spaces where every story belongs. Dr. Watkins, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Do you mind sharing a bit about yourself?
Sure. So I was just telling you a bit about this earlier, but I am a Philadelphia native. I was born in Philadelphia. I was raised in a suburb outside of Philadelphia. And so one of my biggest goals is to contribute to the community in Philadelphia, as there is a need for mental health care and trauma informed care and culturally informed care because of the diversity in the city. I am a recent graduate, like you said, and I'm currently working in private practice, but I also have research on white nationalism and supremacy that I plan to expand on and publish. And so those are just a little bit of tidbits about myself.
Right. Thank you for sharing. You've shared with me that both personal and professional experiences shaped your decision to pursue psychology. What moments or influences inspired you to step into mental health care and serve in the way that you do today?
Absolutely. So I think it's an amalgamation of factors. When I originally entered into college, I started at a small community college near where I live, and I was originally a nursing degree. I always knew I wanted to be a helper, but it wasn't until I took my first psychology course that I recognized that that was where my niche was, which was wanting to become a doctor of psychology. I also have had experiences of mental health within my family in which there are numerous members who've been diagnosed with different mental health disorders. And I was a witness to how those mental health disorders affected them and affected our family at large. And so, that was my own personal experience as well as having some experiences of trauma myself, which then, influenced me to seek out mental health care for myself and engage in, holistic practice that always helps me even to this day. So,
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, I think mental health is it's running rampant, at least here in the US, where we have such poor support and services. From the research that I've read, the US has the highest level of mental health needs in the world.
yes, and for numerous reasons, whether it's
Mhm.
capitalism or the approach to managed care and all those things, there's definitely multiple factors that can be explored about why and how that occurred.
Absolutely. So, as a clinician and a content creator working in the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, you're aware of the barriers many face in accessing those cares.
Mhm.
So, how have you seen representation, trust, and cultural humility play a role in bridging that gap?
To start, while I was attending the program that I attended, there was a, class divested, I would say, or even, um, you know, purely focused on diversity. And so we learned about the addressing framework and, understanding all of the different facets of somebody's identity that would affect them. But I think that really didn't get to apply until I went out into the community and began working in Philadelphia, where I met people from all age groups, religions, gender, sexual orientation, and really saw how their whole person, all of the pieces of them, came together. And then how the system that they're living within also impacts them, right? They live in the city. And so there are things that are occurring in the city that may be impacting them, as well as what's happening in the larger US society. And so, one of the main things that I think is very important for any clinician is to first assess what are this person's cultural identity factors, right? Especially when we're talking about things like age, race, sex, sexual orientation, and sexual gender expression, right? And we're talking about religion, ethnicity, whether this person speaks English or if they speak multiple languages. Um, all kinds of things like that are important to know, especially because with certain people, you need to know that information to help them make a treatment plan, to help them create the goals that they are looking to achieve. And so, wanting to know all of the pieces of the person helps you to bring in the resources. And also acknowledging who they are, because I think a lot of people forget that a person wants to be seen, and that's not just about you listening and validating. That's also about acknowledging who they are at their core and what really is important to them.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that you went out and, put yourself in those situations, that ethnography of understanding a population. And as we look at cultural diversity, we can really only be culturally competent in the culture that we were born and raised in.
Hmm.
And so even though we try to be culturally competent with other um, groups of people, we can't. It's just impossible to do, but we can certainly start that journey of becoming more aware, and that's by getting out and seeing people, where they live and in the trenches, so to speak.
Yeah.
So when you think about your clients, especially those virtually, while also creating accessible resources. What drives your commitment to meet people where they are, especially those who might feel unsure about entering therapy?
So, what drives me to meet people where they are is the experience of knowing what it's like to seek out healthcare and trying to find the right fit and thinking about what made it more amenable versus what maybe made it less amenable. And so, I'm thinking about even when I was working with clients who experienced being unhoused, right? We were not able to see these people in person, right? Or if we were seeing them, we were meeting them in places that felt safe, right, for them. And we were meeting them in places to ensure that they're getting the care that they need or know where resources are that can help them, right? Where the homeless shelters may be, or where hospitals or different areas where they can get food are, right? And so that's one example. In the virtual space, one of the things that I try to do is be very open about what can occur in a virtual space and
Mhm.
how it is very similar to what occurs in an in person space, but how we might have to ensure safety, confidentiality, but also bringing everything with you into it, right? Bringing the
Mhm.
emotion, bringing in, the experiences that you have, and being willing to let those things flow naturally because it's sometimes in a virtual space, it can feel a little bit different in that you might feel less inclined to be vulnerable or less inclined
Mhm.
to show emotion on your face or in your tone of voice or in your body. And so allowing the client to do it in the way that they see that is comfortable for them and also making sure to ensure that they feel safe, that there's a plan in place if something occurs, um, all kinds of things to kind of help ensure that this is a positive process for them.
Great. I know with so many families that who live more rural, that, this virtual opportunity that really um, just took off, of course, during COVID. There's been such a paring back of that service. And sometimes I wonder how many people who had gotten services started had to end them, even though they didn't want to because of the changes in COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, I think about how being virtual came in as a way
Mhm.
to just mediate that experience. And I think to some degree it has improved some people's experience. And I think it also makes it more accessible for those who are very busy or who have
Mhm.
children, tight schedules, all of that.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And you've described healing and empowerment as essential to your mission.
Mhm.
What does empowerment look like in therapy, especially for individuals who have had their voices minimized and overlooked?
Yeah. So I'm very co-collaborative in my process with clients. From the very beginning, when I have my consultation with them, I'm trying to understand what is it about your experience that is, driving you to come and work with me. I try to be very thoughtful about that. And I even recommend that they continue to look around, and then make a final decision. Once they've made a final decision, during their intake, I do a very thorough intake. Like I said, I try to get to understand them at their whole core, get all of the holistic factors. And then when we start to create a treatment plan, I'm asking them, what are your goals? What are you intending to get out of this work? What are strategies that we can actually do in session or you can do outside of the session that are actually in line with like who you are and what you've experienced in life, right? Um,
Hmm.
and then in addition to that, as far as empowerment is concerned, I'm really always trying to get them to reframe about thoughts. For instance, automatic negative thoughts are going to have a negative impact on the client, right? And so I'm trying to always challenge them to think of things in a different manner, right? Or experience themselves in a different manner. And really, first and foremost, calling back their own power, right? Especially with clients that I have worked with that have experienced, severe trauma or chronic relational trauma. We are trying to get this person to call their power back, set boundaries, communicate their needs, be assertive, and these are all things that take time, but continuously modeling and then also supporting them through the processes of all of this, it really assists them in feeling empowered. And more than that, actually going and doing it in real life once they're out of the session with me.
No, absolutely. And as you were talking about the questions you ask of your clients, I'm wondering, so often I hear on social media or some of my followers, that they don't go to therapy because they didn't like the therapist. And I know for me, I've had multiple therapists based on where I was over the last 20 years on what I needed, but it didn't always mean that the first one I found worked. So I started to learn that I needed to interview them as well and see if it was a good fit. So, what are your thoughts on that when clients come in for the first time? What encouragements would you give them to ask a therapist?
One of the first things I think that is important is to ask the therapist maybe, what are their values, right? Or worldviews. Um, Research says that it's not necessarily most important if you compare on like things like gender or race, right? It's more important that the person you're working with has the same values as you or the same worldviews as you, right? And so, what's important to have in a therapist is what I would ask them. What are the things that you're looking for? What are the strengths that this therapist should be exuding or modeling to you? Because in a lot of these situations, you're serving in a role where you're almost like a guide or a teacher in some ways. And so if this person views you as somebody who is competent, capable, having similar understandings of things that they do, then they're going to trust you more than if you're exuding things that are very much separate or opposite to what they experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I completely agree. When I work, in my other capacity as a special ed professional, as a school doctor, so to speak, I'm always asking those questions of students of what are your goals? What do you need? And then what do you expect of me as an educator? So those things are so important. So on that note, then, if we take a step back even further, what are those gentle encouragements or first steps that you would want to offer to our listeners when they absolutely first start this search for therapy, and especially for those who are part of a historically underserved community?
So, one of the things that I think is best is to use the resources you have at hand. We all have access, or I don't want to say we all, but some of us, right, or many of us have access to, technology that we can render useful in this process. If you even if you don't have access to it directly, even going to your local library, getting on a computer, and doing some research could be very helpful. Once you get on there, I would say look for resources that are in line to yourself, right? So if you're looking for something that's in network with your insurance, take a look at that information on the website for your insurance. See who's in network. You can then type that person in Google. You can look up their information, look up the things that have been said about them, right? See what kind of person they are, look at their website, get a better understanding of them. The other resources that I would recommend are things like Therapy for Black Girls. That's a wonderful resource for young Black women and young Black girls who are looking for clinicians that are specifically certified in treating and working with them. Another really lovely resource is called Inclusive Therapists. Inclusive Therapist is there for everybody. Anything that you can think of as far as your identity factors, whether it be race, your body type, your age, your sexual orientation, your religion, they have a therapist for any of that in any state in the US. And so when you look up on inclusive therapists, you can put in what your needs are, and they will send you a bunch of therapists that meet those needs, and whether they're in your state or not. And so then, again, for other people, like for black men, there's therapy for black men. There are a host of different websites catering to people from different backgrounds, but these kinds of resources can find you somebody who is specifically trained and has good understanding of how to work with someone with those specific identity factors.
Great, thank you. So, Denise, as we're approaching the holiday season, and this is going to be, aired on the 14th, I know for me, the holidays are just filled with trauma memories. And so holidays are, especially the Christmas season, is really hard for me, even though it is my faith and it is a celebration. What encouraging words do you have for people who are entering this season with trepidation, um, trauma memories, and how to move through the season when they need to be around large groups of people?
Yes. Yeah, one of the things that I recommend first and foremost is to ground yourself, right? And there's a multitude of ways you can do this by deep breathing, by finding a contact item like a nice, good, fuzzy sweater, you know, even having something like a stress ball or a fidget, right, that you can bring around with you, something to keep yourself busy but aware, right? So that you can kind of lessen those physical or emotional responses that you're having, especially if you're in a large group or something of that sort. One of the other things that I think is important is to remain aware of your own boundaries. If something feels like too much, try not to push yourself harder than you can take, right? If you're not so comfortable with big gatherings, maybe try something a little bit more intimate. If you're really struggling with sleep and you have to get stuff wrapped up before the night, try to do it on a different day, right? Where you maybe have a little bit more rest and energy. Do what's best for yourself and listen to your body, listen to your emotions. Because trying to push yourself harder doesn't pay off, and you end up having to work really hard to get back to baseline after that. So just do what makes your body feel safe, what makes you feel comfortable.
Right now, I think for me, it's remembering to listen to my body because I will feel it and I know it's telling me something, but I just get tunnel vision thinking I have to do these things. These are the expectations. And so I'm learning to listen a bit better. Denise, do you have anything else you'd like to share with us today?
I just want to say, I'm very thankful for you bringing me on and having this conversation. And, I'm hoping that maybe we can collaborate more in the future. And I just hope that the resources and the information I provided is helpful to someone out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I've already got you in mind for some projects I have coming up in the new year, and wanting to be able to pick your brain and utilize the sources that you have to especially help the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, since that is the population you serve. So as I think about what you've shared today, I'm reminded that healing is just not personal, it's communal, it's cultural, and it's generational. Your work reflects that what we value so deeply at Redeem Thyself and at Seven Petals. And that's it, the courage to confront our wounds, the wisdom to understand our identity, and the power to reclaim our story in spaces designed to honor who we truly are. So for those in the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities who have struggled to access care, felt unseen in clinical settings, or carried trauma in silence, may this conversation offer permission, validation, and hope. Healing does not require perfection. It begins with one step, one connection, one moment of being met with compassion instead of judgment. So thank you, Dr. Watkins. Thank you for your insight, your voice, and your commitment to expanding access to mental health care. And thank you to all of our listeners for being part of this space. Until next time, this is Redeeming Stories Podcast. May you walk gently with your story, honor your identity, and trust that your healing is possible because you are worth that work. See you soon.